Super Metroid is my favourite game. I personally consider it to be perfect. There is absolutely nothing about the game I would change. It is a masterpiece. It's one of the most genre-defining games that has ever been created, inventing the action exploration genre and influencing untold game developers and designers to this very day, earning its spot as a pinnacle of what a game can be. But how did it come about? How did it get this way? Join me in my history of Super Metroid as I delve into the making of this classic, from conception to completion. I'm not going to review the game or talk about its impact on gaming after it was released. That information has been covered 1,000 times and isn't anything new. This is something different. This is the pitch, the creation, the design and development of an absolute classic. Welcome to the Making of Super Metroid. In 1990, Yoshio Sakamoto, a producer at Nintendo, was not satisfied with his position. He had recently worked on Balloon Kid, a Game Boy title, and before that various Famicom Disk System games, whilst also working with Nintendo Research and Development 1, also known as R&D 1, led by legendary Nintendo designer Gunpei Yokoi, on various Game Boy titles, and the one-hit wonder NES title Kid Icarus. His thoughts pined back to one of his crowning works up until then, NES action exploration, Metroid. By 1990, his eyes were looking forlornly at Nintendo's upcoming flagship Super Famicom, with an eye to make a Metroid sequel. He was not interested in the actual Metroid sequel that was currently being developed for the Game Boy, leaving the rest of R&D 1, headed by artist Hiroji Kiyotaki, to lead that, while he continued designing and pitching a true console sequel to Metroid. Sakamoto brought together a small group of R&D 1 insiders and programmers from Intelligent Systems, a second-party developer closely affiliated with Nintendo, to start designing the Metroid sequel. At this point, Nintendo had not approved the sequel, and they were extremely hesitant to. The first Metroid, whilst well received critically, had not sold well, and R&D 1 as a whole was known for producing solid titles, but rarely producing big franchises. This was part of a bigger rivalry within Nintendo between Gunpei Yokoi and Miyamoto, who led EAD, as whilst Yokoi could produce excellent one-hit wonders such as Ice Climbers and various Game Boy hits, they weren't known for producing smash franchises such as Super Mario or The Legend of Zelda. Despite this, after constant pitching, 6 months later Makoto Kano, Sakamoto's boss, was given approval by Gunpei Yokoi to join Sakamoto and officially start development on a Metroid game for the Super Famicom, which would become, in due course, Super Metroid. The design and concept of the game had already been established before the release of Metroid 2. They wanted to see how far they could push the Super Famicom to generate, in Sakamoto's words, a greater power of expression and enhance the game world with high quality graphics, all whilst working with an essentially unchanged concept. Sakamoto wanted to build on the expressiveness on Metroid 2, but achieve greater presence, something closer to reality. The end of Metroid 2 directly influenced the start of Super Metroid, with the final scene in Metroid 2 in which the baby Metroid is born and spared by Samus, leading directly to the events on the space station, in which the space pirate Ridley attacks, stealing the Metroid and taking it to the living planet Zebes, the scene of the first game. Zebes was greatly expanded upon for Super Metroid. The game was designed in such a way that it was a giant labyrinth-themed puzzle in which every single part is connected with another part, with doors that would only open under certain circumstances, and an emphasis being put on designing a perfect labyrinth without any mistakes or dead ends. Nothing was in the game for no reason, and everything had a purpose. Designing a next-gen Metroid game wasn't just about the graphics, but also the level design. Sakamoto and the rest of the team were extremely reluctant to make use of any of the storytelling methods that RPGs and adventure games had begun to utilise. They didn't want to explain anything to the player, instead designing the game in such a way that they would be able to play and work things out for themselves. The maps were created so the player couldn't progress or escape without exploration, or they would end up going in a circle and ending up back where they started, but with additional options for progression. The player would have to think about the area, feeling their way through the game. A core objective was that when a player discovered a new item or area, they wanted the player to feel that they had made that discovery independently, without any help from the game, and feel a sense of achievement from that. This created some issues for Sakamoto. There was pressure from inside Nintendo to have some sort of dialogue or storytelling in the game, but Sakamoto was extremely stubborn, believing that the essence of Metroid was always to be found in the gameplay mechanics, not the story. Many different games and movies influenced Super Metroid, But Sakamoto stated that one of the major influences on the art direction was H.R. Geiger's Necronomicon and the film Alien. They wanted the game to have a different feel from other Nintendo titles, feeling as if they were projecting a different image from within Nintendo, something a little darker, influenced by science fiction, and hopefully unique. Whilst the game was in prototype stage, there was just Sakamoto, another Nintendo designer, and a few programmers from Intelligent Systems. They explored what would be possible and how to make the game more fun to play, what new ideas and systems they can incorporate into the game. Intelligent Systems, also known as INTSYS, provided indispensable technical know-how for the project. Nintendo and INTSYS have a mutually beneficial relationship. INTSYS is a second-party developer. He has always worked extremely closely with Nintendo, specialising in the hardware side of things. The programmers from INTSYS gave the Nintendo developers crucial advice and ideas on what the new Super Famicom was technically capable of, which features they could use, and how to utilise them. This was indispensable to the team, as the Super Famicom early on gained a reputation as being a difficult console to develop for. This was due to how the VRAM could be partitioned. Poor partitioning could severely limit the on-screen capabilities, so efficient and clever coding was crucial. The developers from both Nintendo and INTSYS ended up having a lot of fun with the hardware, driven by not wanting to be outdone by the arcade games and competing consoles of the time. After this prototype stage, NCL, aka Nintendo Company Limited, drafted in the rest of the team. The core team, eventually formed by Sakamoto and Kano, consists of around 14 people, divided into 5 designers, 7 programmers and 2 musicians, with freelancers being brought into the project at various points when they became necessary. All of the INTSYS staff provided to the project were programmers, but despite this, there was no rivalry between the two company staff, just harmony and cooperation. The teamwork had very beneficial results, with one of the key designers on the Nintendo side, Tomomi Yamane, constantly consulting with the INTSYS team about what images could be displayed on the console, influencing his design and increasing his knowledge of the hardware considerably. Much of the team is made up of young trainees and junior developers. This created a contrast within the team, but Sakamoto credits the youth with bringing a certain let's go for it spirit to the project, energising the older developers in what was becoming an increasingly harsh development cycle. By the time development had begun in earnest, Nintendo's lack of faith in the project began to show. The budget was constantly being cut, and the game was threatened with cancellation 3 times, due to the fact the cartridge size was growing continuously, as well as the development team missing many of their deadlines. The mood within Nintendo was already wary of the project, so any indications that all may not be going according to schedule was particularly damning. For the entire team, it was their Super Famicom debut. This brought up many problems. One being, the larger scope of the game meant that more sprites and artwork was required, with every developer and designer having some sort of input. This backfired somewhat, as it resulted in a mishmash of styles that were not consistent with one another, causing the lead designer, Tomomi Yamane, to have to go back through and retouch almost everything that had been submitted in order to unify the game's presentation. The musical composition for the game, as well as every sound effect, was created by 2 musicians, Manako Hamano and Kenji Yamamoto. They built upon the original Metroid themes created by Hirokazu Tanaka, expanding upon them and making many new themes as well. They used acoustic instruments and synthesizers to experiment and compose the score before converting them into digital properties that could be played by the Super Nintendo. The soundtrack became a mix of brooding, dark atmospheric music, fast action-style pieces, and triumphant overtures, and pushed the Super Nintendo sound chip to its absolute limit, delivering an orchestral masterpiece. Despite this, the pair was not convinced of many of the sound effects they had created in the game, feeling them a little flat, particularly the screams of Samus and the aliens when they died. To remedy this, Manako Himano stood in front of a microphone and began whimpering and letting out cries, with the results creating a far more unsettling and fitting sound for the game. There are, however, conflicting reports about the exact usage of her voice, with some places reporting that it was directly used, and others saying that it was too sexual so it wasn't used. Regardless, either way, it was a direct influence on the final product, whether or not it was directly replicated. The team was going to great lengths to achieve a balance. The items, locations, puzzles, bosses, enemies, and Samus's various acquired abilities all had to work in conjunction with one another, and creating the balance was a constant battle. It meant they often had to experiment, and then build and rebuild until they got the balance right, which in turn led to the development time extending and deadlines being missed. They were adamant not to create an on-rails experience, so balancing the progression and exploration was key in creating the game they wanted to make. Gunpei Yokoi was the general project manager of Super Metroid by default, as he was the head of R&D1. However, he took a hands-off approach to the development of the game, leaving it in the hands of producer Sakamoto and his boss, Makoto Kano. Yokoi often visited the team with fresh ideas, but became increasingly frustrated with the project as it went on. With deadlines and objectives being missed, Kano was even given a final warning concerning his position within the company at some point. This led to a frenzied final stage of development, in when the Higashiyama building, the headquarters of NCL at the time, became almost a sort of boarding house. During the last 6 months of development, many of the staff ended up working extreme overtime, with a nap room being designated when the staff felt they didn't have time to go home. Sakamoto recalled there always being at least 10 members of staff working throughout the night, with the place ending up resembling a zoo. Sakamoto said that the nap room was not a clean place, and all the other workers at Nintendo would often give them funny looks, as they were all overworked and unclean during the final stages of development. Gunpei Yokoi was angry about the staff pushing themselves to such extreme lengths. However, the developers' passion for the project was unbridled, as many felt a great sense of ownership and mission for the project, wanting to create something truly fantastic. In 1994, after years of principal development, since the original idea of the game back in 1990, the game was finally ready to test. All of the staff members spent 1 month constantly playing through the entire game, correcting any bugs found, adjusting the difficulty, and perfecting the course of a playthrough. This was followed by an additional month of testing by freelancers, brought in to give a fresh pair of eyes to the project. These people had no involvement with the project whatsoever, so could offer a unique perspective compared to the people that become intimately involved with the game over the years, being able to give their true opinions, as they wouldn't feel any sort of pride over the project. They were asked to test the game and find bugs, as well as give their opinions on the difficulty, the areas, the graphics, the controls, and more. This was tremendously useful to the developers, allowing them to perfect the game, and then finally, in the spring of 1994, Super Metroid hit Japanese shelves. Within Nintendo, the game surpassed expectations. Every one of the team members was redeemed, and they managed to prove themselves. Gunpei Yokoi held the game in such high regard that he became addicted to playing it, and after this, whenever anyone brought him a pitch for a game he didn't think was good, he asked them to go away and play Super Metroid before coming back to him, holding it up as the perfect example of a game. This was surprising to many within Nintendo, as Yokoi was notorious for not dishing out praise, so his recommendation really meant a lot. The reception around the world was equally impressive, with many outlets giving the game a near perfect scores, and it being received as one of the best games not only to hit the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom, but any console ever. Despite this universal acclaim, sales figures were average and did not perform as well as Nintendo might have hoped given the scores. It was competing against Donkey Kong Country, as well as the upcoming Sega Saturn, and it was very late into the console's lifespan, when many gamers' attention had somewhat drifted from 16-bit consoles, as the new batch of 32-bit consoles was fast approaching. Over the years, Super Metroid has gradually managed to build up its reputation, and is now held as a true Nintendo classic, receiving successful sequels on the GameCube and cementing Samus as a Nintendo heavyweight. It's clear that everyone involved with the project was passionate about the game, and that truly shows. There isn't one area of the game which was done lazily. Everything from the level design, the sprites, the music, and the gameplay is the absolute pinnacle of a 2D game, and what the Super Nintendo was capable of. It shows that a game doesn't need to sell particularly well to be a classic, and Super Metroid will almost definitely stand the test of time. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It'd be great to see everyone's story of when they first played Super Metroid in the comments below, and what you felt when you played it, and what you think of it today. If you have any suggestions for future videos, do let me know, and I really hope you subscribe, like and share. Goodbye!